Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I never thought my town could turn on me so quickly. We'd lived here nearly 10 years, long enough for neighbors to know my daughter Ella was the quiet type. She wasn't the kind of girl who sought trouble. She was bookish, awkward, shy in crowds, more likely to bury her nose in a novel than wander down to the creek with the others. So when Sheriff Hanley knocked on our door that night, hat in hand, mouth set in a grim line, I already knew something was wrong. The way his eyes avoided mine told me whatever he was about to say would stain the walls of this house forever. "Evening," he said. "Mind if I step inside?" My gut twisted. What's this about? He glanced past me into the living room, where Ella sat on the couch, sketchbook open across her knees. The TV flickered blue light over her face, making her look pale, distant. Hanley sighed. "There's been an incident," he said, "over by the Miller property." I tightened my grip on the door frame. Everyone knew the Millers lived out by the tree line, far enough from town to feel isolated, close enough for rumors to spread when things went wrong. "What kind of incident?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. The sheriff adjusted his hat, and for the first time his eyes met mine. "They found the Jacobs girl, Caroline." The name hit me like a rock. Caroline Jacobs was Ella's classmate, though they'd never been close. Sweet kid, always smiling in yearbook photos, the kind of girl teachers adored. "Found her how?" I asked, but I already knew. Hanley swallowed hard. "Dead, near the woods." The word clung to me, heavy and final. Dead. My stomach turned, but before I could process it, Hanley lowered his voice. "Thing is, we've got witnesses who say they saw Ella walking with Caroline earlier today. And," he paused, shifting uncomfortably, "there's evidence. A backpack near the scene belongs to your daughter." I whipped around to look at Ella. She stared at us, wide-eyed, her pencil slipping from her fingers to the carpet. "That's not true," she whispered. My pulse thundered in my ears. "She was home, with me, all evening." Hanley lifted a hand. "I'm not saying she did anything, but folks are already talking. We've got to ask questions." "Questions," I barked. "You're accusing her of murder." His face hardened. "I'm not accusing, but the town's small, you know that. People notice things. She was seen, her bag was found, and Caroline's family's torn to pieces right now. You can imagine how they'll take it." Ella was shaking her head, tears forming. I didn't. That night, after Hanley left with his promise of further investigation, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Ella's bag on the counter. She swore it had gone missing 2 days ago, thought she left it at school. Now it had shown up by a corpse. I wanted to believe it was some cruel coincidence, but the sheriff's warning gnawed at me. People are already talking. By morning, the whispers had spread like wildfire. At the gas station, I caught 2 women watching me with tight mouths, murmuring when I walked past. At the grocery store, the cashier avoided eye contact. And when I dropped Ella at school, the looks were worse. Parents clutching their kids closer, students pointing, laughter edged with fear. That's when I realized something sick was happening. The town wanted a villain, and they'd chosen my daughter. I spent the next night combing through the woods myself. I didn't care how crazy it looked. Flashlight in hand, boots sinking into mud. I searched for anything that proved Ella's innocence. The Miller's land was roped off with yellow tape, but beyond it the ground told stories. Trampled leaves, broken branches, cigarette butts crushed into the dirt, and then I found it. A ribbon of red fabric snagged on a branch, fluttering in the breeze. Not from Ella's clothes. She didn't own anything like that. But Caroline did. I'd seen her wearing a red scarf last winter. a gift from her grandmother. My chest tightened. Someone else had been here. Someone who wanted us to look in the wrong direction. That night, after Ella went to bed, I dug deeper. Caroline's social media, old yearbook photos, anything that might show who'd been close to her. That's when I saw it. A string of comments under her posts, all from the same account. Compliments, jokes, inside references. At first they seemed harmless, teenage banter, but then they got strange. You looked perfect today. Wish you'd answered my calls. Don't make me wait again. The account had no profile picture, no real name, just a shadow. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't Ella. Someone else had been obsessed with Caroline. Someone who'd been watching. I barely slept, and when dawn broke, I sat at the table clutching my phone, scrolling through those messages again and again. There was something predatory in them, something that made my skin crawl. Whoever it was, they knew her routines, her habits. They wanted her alone. The worst part? One comment stood out from the rest. You shouldn't trust your friends. One of them will turn on you. I thought of Ella, framed, her backpack left like bait, and for the first time, I wondered if the killer wasn't just hiding in the shadows. He was orchestrating the whole story, pulling us in like puppets. Morning broke with an unnatural stillness. The air felt heavy, the silence pressing against my ears until the faint creaks of the house became sharp as needles. I hadn't slept more than a few minutes, each doze shattered by the image of the hallway light flickering and the sound of those deliberate footsteps. The door to the spare room was ajar again. I didn't even remember leaving it closed the night before, but it had definitely been shut. Now it stood open a few inches, as if daring me to look inside. My throat tightened. I forced myself forward, pushing the door wider, sunlight spilling into the dim space. The room was unchanged. Bare walls, dusty air, a faint chill lingering like breath. But the sheets on the mattress had shifted. Not by accident, not by draft. They had been pulled down neatly, as if someone had lain there through the night. I left the house after that. I couldn't think. I just grabbed my jacket and walked aimlessly down the empty road until I reached the gas station a mile away. I bought coffee, burned my tongue on it, and kept sipping anyway, desperate for the ordinary feel of a paper cup in my hand. The cashier, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a bored expression, glanced at me when I mentioned the farmhouse. "That old place?" he asked, his tone changing. "You actually stay in there?" I nodded. He shook his head slowly. "Place has a history. Tenants don't last long. Some say it's got things living in it. Not mice. Not anything you can catch. Best keep the spare room locked if you're smart." His words crawled into my chest like cold water. I wanted to ask more, but his expression shut the conversation down. I left with my coffee, the warning circling in my head. Back at the farmhouse, I told myself I wouldn't go near the spare room again. I could keep the door shut, maybe even lock it with the rusty key I'd found in the kitchen drawer. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid it. The house wanted me to pay attention. That night, I left every light on, as if brightness could drown out dread. Midnight crept closer. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I didn't dare sleep. Around 1 in the morning, I heard the door creak open. The spare room. I froze, every muscle coiled, my ears straining. Something moved down the hall, slow, deliberate. A dragging step, followed by another. My chest heaved with shallow breaths. I gripped the edge of the couch cushion like it could anchor me to reality. When I finally looked up, the figure stood there. It was tall, too tall, its head brushing the ceiling. Its body was wrong, angles that bent too far, a silhouette that didn't belong in human form. Its face, if you could call it that, was an empty oval, blank and smooth except for 2 deep depressions where eyes should have been. It didn't move closer, but I felt its gaze burrowing into me. The temperature in the room dropped until my breath came out in pale clouds. My body screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Then it raised its hand. Long, skeletal fingers stretched unnaturally wide, and pointed toward the spare room. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed. At some point the figure was gone, the hallway empty again. But the message was clear. Whatever lived in this house wanted me in that room. The next day blurred by in a haze of terror and denial. I tried leaving, stuffing a bag with clothes and my keys, but when I reached the driveway, the car refused to start. The engine didn't even turn over, just dead silence. I called for a tow, but no signal reached this far out. The farmhouse had me trapped. By dusk, I stood in front of the spare room door, key in hand. My reflection in the old brass knob looked pale and gaunt, as if days had drained me into something unrecognizable. I unlocked the door. Inside, the air was colder than before, almost damp. The mattress was no longer bare. A blanket I had never seen lay folded neatly at the foot, and a small wooden box sat on the pillow. My hand trembled as I reached for it, every instinct screaming against it. The box creaked open. Inside was a stack of photographs, sepia-toned, aged, curling at the edges. They showed different families standing outside the farmhouse, smiling stiffly. Each group had something in common. A blurred figure lingering in the background, tall, thin, faceless. The last photograph made my stomach lurch. It was me, standing in the hallway, the picture taken from behind. I hadn't posed for it. I hadn't known it existed. And there, just over my shoulder, was the faceless figure. The floor groaned behind me. I turned slowly, dread flooding every vein. The figure stood in the doorway, its faceless head tilting slightly, as though it were admiring my discovery. Its long arm rose again, pointing, not at the bed this time, but directly at me. I used to believe trust was the one thing our little town still had left. We were a dying place, tucked between endless miles of cornfields and broken roads. The kind of town where the post office and the diner had more gossip than the newspaper. People leaned on each other here because what else did we have? That's why, when my neighbor Walter Green told me about his big idea, the one that would save us all, I didn't think twice. Walter was the kind of man you didn't question. He'd been there at every fundraiser, every funeral, every 4th of July barbecue. My dad had played cards with him at the lodge, and when my wife was sick a few years back, Walter was the first one to show up with a hot meal. He wasn't just a neighbor, he was part of the backbone that held our fragile town together. It was February when he came to me. We were sitting in the diner, steam rising off weak coffee, when he leaned across the table and told me he'd found a way to breathe life back into our struggling community. He wanted to buy up the abandoned grain mill at the edge of town, the one that had sat rotting since the 80s, and turn it into a cooperative. Farmers would bring their harvest there, store and sell in bulk, and cut out the middlemen who bled them dry. He promised it would bring jobs, money, and pride back to our dying Main Street. I remember staring out the window at that hulking silhouette of the mill. Everyone avoided it. Kids dared each other to sneak inside at night, but even they didn't go far past the rusted gates. Its broken windows glared out like hollow eyes, and sometimes on still nights, people swore they heard the grinding of gears inside. I'd always written it off as coyotes or the wind, but when Walter mentioned the place, a chill crawled up my spine. Still, he had papers, contracts, projections, a stack of documents thicker than my arm. And when he said he'd already convinced half a dozen townsfolk to chip in, I felt the familiar fear of being left behind. At home, my wife frowned at the idea. "That place is cursed," she said flatly, and she wasn't one for superstitions. "Even if it weren't, it's falling apart. You can't just pour money into a graveyard." But I pushed. I told her about Walter's vision, about the way he'd smiled, warm and confident, like a man who'd already seen the future we were too blind to imagine. She sighed, said it was our savings, but she wouldn't fight me if I really believed in it. That was all I needed. By March, I'd handed Walter every dollar we'd scraped together over 20 years. Others did too. The retired teacher, the Anderson family, the young couple with a baby. The whole town, it seemed, was leaning on this one promise. And Walter, he made us believe. For a while, everything looked real. Trucks came rumbling down Main Street carrying steel beams and crates of machinery. Work crews hammered inside the mill, their silhouettes flickering against floodlights at night. Walter sent updates, photographs of shiny equipment, emails full of progress. He even threw a cookout in April, flipping burgers while kids ran around laughing. Everyone said the same thing. This was the first time in years it felt like our town might have a future. But it was around then that the whispers began. First came the animals, coyotes, raccoons, even a few dogs. People found them in ditches, skinned and gutted, organs missing. At night, cattle spooked and stampeded without reason, smashing through fences like something had terrified them. Then came the noises. Farmers working late swore they heard grinding metal echoing from the mill, though Walter insisted no work was being done after sundown. Others spoke of strange lights, greenish glows pulsing behind the boarded windows. I told myself it was nerves. The mill had always been a source of stories. But then my daughter came home pale one night, saying she and her friends had dared each other to go near the gates. She swore she heard someone whisper her name from the shadows. By May, Walter was telling us the grand reopening was only weeks away. "This town's about to change forever," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. He looked tired, though, his face drawn, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. When I asked if everything was all right, he smiled too quickly and said the work was just demanding. That same night, I woke up to a low, mechanical hum drifting across the fields. I went outside, standing in the cold grass, and listened. The sound was coming from the direction of the mill. Not hammering, not welding, but the steady throb of gears turning. And beneath it, faint, almost too faint to notice, something that sounded like voices chanting. The next morning I drove out there. The gates were chained, no trespassing signs nailed to the posts, but I could see fresh tire tracks in the dirt. The main doors hung open, swaying slightly in the wind, though no crew was in sight. I told myself I'd only take a quick look, just to ease my mind. Inside, the air was damp and sour, like rotting corn. Shafts of light pierced the broken ceiling, illuminating dust that hung like fog. The machinery Walter had boasted about wasn't there. No new combines or elevators, just the same rusted husks that had always stood silent. But on the concrete floor, someone had painted circles, dozens of them. Interlocking patterns stretched across the vast hall, drawn in what looked like thick, dried tar. Candles sat at their edges, burned down to stubs. I stood frozen, my heart hammered against my ribs. Then I heard it, the clanging of metal deep within the mill. Not random, not broken machinery, but rhythmic, like the turning of gears. I followed the sound, each step echoing too loudly. My flashlight beam caught more drawings on the walls, crude figures with elongated limbs, hollow eyes, mouths open wide as if screaming. That's when I saw Walter. He was kneeling on the floor near the base of the old grain chute, his back to me. He wore the same flannel shirt I'd seen him in at church the week before, but it was soaked through with sweat. Around him, the candles flickered, though there was no wind. "Walter," my voice cracked. He didn't turn. His shoulders rose and fell in jagged breaths. "Almost ready," he whispered. I stepped closer, and then I saw what he was working on. In the center of the circle lay something that shouldn't have been there. Something alive. It writhed, not like an animal, not like anything I could name, but like a mass of shadows pressed into flesh. Its surface rippled, its form shifting, and when the candlelight struck it, the thing shuddered as if it had been fed. Walter finally looked up. His eyes were wide, fever bright. "It needs more," he said hoarsely. "Just a little more. Then it'll give us everything." I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "What the hell did you do?" He stood, towering over me, his hands blackened with something that wasn't dirt. "Don't you see? This town was dying. We had nothing left. But the mill, it was always more than stone and steel. It's older than us, older than this land. It just needed someone to wake it up. The thing on the floor convulsed, letting out a wet, sucking sound. I swear it turned toward me, though it had no face. My legs went weak. Walter reached out, his voice breaking. You trusted me, didn't you? We all trusted each other. That's why it works. That's why it needed all of us. I ran. I don't remember how I got out, only that I didn't stop until I was in my truck, tires spitting gravel as I sped home. For days after, I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I'd seen shadows, paint, some trick of exhaustion. But then people began to vanish. First, the retired teacher, then the young couple. One by one, the very people who'd invested in Walter's dream disappeared. Their houses stood empty, their cars abandoned. The sheriff searched, but there were no tracks, no clues, just absence. And through it all, the hum from the mill grew louder. At night, I could hear it from my bedroom. The low throb of machinery mixed with something far worse, the whisper of voices, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. Now the town is hollow. Families packed up and fled. Stores stand boarded. And Walter, he's still there. Sometimes I see him at the edge of the fields, watching me with eyes that glow faintly in the dark. I can't leave. Not yet. Someone has to tell the story. Someone has to remember what really happened before the whole place is swallowed. But the truth is, I know it's already too late. The mill isn't abandoned anymore. It's awake, and it's hungry. When I first moved into my apartment, I thought the worst thing I'd have to deal with was the smell of cigarette smoke drifting up from the downstairs neighbor. It wasn't a glamorous place. Just a one-bedroom unit in an aging brick building with paint that flaked off the banisters and a parking lot that flooded every time it rained. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had my own space, a door I could lock behind me, and a chance to start over after a messy breakup. The apartment came with little quirks. The radiator hissed like a tea kettle at random hours. The fridge hummed louder than seemed reasonable, and the bedroom window latch didn't quite line up. I shoved a stick in the frame as a makeshift lock and figured that was good enough. I didn't know anyone in the area yet, so when I discovered there was a neighborhood forum online, I thought it might be a good way to get involved. The posts were simple. Someone looking for a lost cat, another announcing a garage sale, a teenager asking if anyone had jumper cables. I made a quick introduction. Hi, just moved into Oakwood Apartments. Hope to meet some of you soon. And didn't think much more about it. A few days later, I got my first private message. Welcome to the neighborhood. Hope you like pasta. I frowned at the screen. Pasta? It didn't make much sense until I remembered I'd posted a picture of my dinner on Instagram the night before. Spaghetti with jarred marinara sauce. A lonely meal, but mine all the same. I hadn't connected my Instagram to the forum. At least I didn't think I had. Maybe it was just coincidence? Or maybe they'd seen my username somewhere else. Still, it unsettled me. I didn't reply. The next night, another message came. Don't forget to close your kitchen window before bed. Gets chilly at night. This one made me sit up straight. My kitchen window was open. Only a few inches, but open nonetheless. I'd cracked it earlier when the oven made the apartment unbearably warm. My stomach tightened as I stared at the words. I typed back quickly. Who is this? No response came. I locked the window, closed all the blinds, and told myself not to be paranoid. It was probably just a neighbor who could see into my unit from another building. Maybe they thought they were being friendly. Creepy, yes, but harmless. The following morning, another message waited for me. You looked restless last night. Trouble sleeping? I didn't even move at first. I just stared at the screen while my coffee went cold in my hand. How could they know that? I had tossed and turned for hours, every creak of the building making me jolt awake. I hadn't opened the blinds. No one should have been able to see me. From that point on, the messages became routine. Short, anonymous notes that bled into every part of my life. Blue shirt looks good on you. That podcast you listen to at night, Pretty funny. Careful leaving dishes in the sink. Ants love crumbs. Each one was small enough to explain away, but the pattern was undeniable. Whoever this was, they knew my habits, my clothes, my routines. They weren't just looking from across the courtyard. They were closer. I considered going to the police, but what would I even tell them? Someone sending me weird messages on a forum. That wouldn't get me far. And besides, there was no proof it was more than an over-friendly neighbor with too much time on their hands. So I tried to ignore it, until the night the messages turned darker. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sitting in bed with the glow of my laptop on my face, trying to drown out my nerves with some mindless TV. Then the notification popped up. You should turn off the light. Sleep is important. Don't make me remind you again. My chest constricted. Don't make me remind you again. That implied consequences. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse hammering in my throat. Every shadow in the room seemed sharper. I checked the closet, under the bed, the bathroom. Empty. I double-checked the locks. Secure. But when I turned out the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was already inside. The following days blurred together. I barely ate, barely slept, jumping at every sound. Work became impossible to focus on. The messages didn't stop. Don't leave your toothbrush wet. Bacteria grows fast. You shouldn't eat so late. Bad for your stomach. I liked your dream last night. The one about running. That last one broke me. How could they know my dreams? My skin crawled as though invisible hands were already on me. I decided to stay with a coworker for a couple of nights, but when I checked my forum inbox from their place, there was another new message waiting. Running away won't help. You'll come home eventually. I'll be here. I wanted to vomit. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching. They were inside. That night, for the first time since moving in, I truly understood how fragile the thin walls of my apartment were, and how little protection a locked door really gave me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that basement again, the faint stink of mildew, the wet slap of something moving just out of sight, and those eyes I was certain had locked onto me before the door slammed shut. By morning, my nerves were frayed. I told myself I had imagined most of it. Lack of sleep, the stress of being on the road alone, maybe even a mild hallucination. But when I checked my car, I noticed something I hadn't the night before. A smear of mud streaked across the back passenger side door. Not dust. Not the kind of road grime you get after miles of highway. This was fresh, damp, as though someone, or something, had pressed a filthy hand against the car while I was inside the station. The sight of it made my stomach churn. I should have left right then, but curiosity had its claws in me. Against my better judgment, I went back inside the station after sunrise. The store looked normal, too normal. The clerk behind the counter wasn't the same man from the night before. This one was older, heavy-set, cheerful in the way people are when they're not quite awake but trying. "Morning," he greeted. I asked as casually as I could, "Was someone else working last night? Tall guy, maybe mid-30s?" The man looked puzzled. "No, sir. I've been on nights all week. Only one here. Store doesn't really keep more than one of us at a time." My mouth went dry. "You sure?" He gave a little laugh, thinking I was joking. "Pretty sure I'd know if I was here or not." I didn't push it. Instead, I bought a coffee, left, and told myself to forget it. But the highway had other plans. Not 15 miles down the road, my car began to sputter. I checked the fuel gauge. It was full, just as I'd left the station. But the engine coughed and died anyway, leaving me coasting onto the shoulder of a long, empty stretch of asphalt lined with dark pine trees. The silence was unbearable. I popped the hood and tried to pretend I knew what I was doing. I didn't. My hands shook too badly to even check the oil. And then I heard it again. That dragging sound. Slow, deliberate, like bare feet being pulled across gravel. The trees seemed to lean closer. "Hello?" I called out, hating the way my voice cracked. No response. Just the wind hissing through the pines. I was about to retreat to the car when I noticed something else, a trail of footprints in the dirt along the roadside. They weren't boot prints, not even sneakers. They were bare, long, narrow, and sunken deep into the soil, as if whoever made them weighed far more than they should have. They led from the trees straight to the back of my car, and then stopped. I staggered back, scanning the empty road, the thick tree line, the sky already darkening with an afternoon storm. My first thought was to run, to abandon the car altogether and make for the nearest mile marker. But before I could move, I heard the trunk creak, just a tiny sound, like the metal shifting under weight. I forced myself forward, every nerve screaming not to. I gripped the handle, yanked the trunk open. Empty, completely empty. But the smell hit me. Rot, damp earth, and something else I can't quite describe. Like copper and mold had been ground together. I slammed the trunk shut and nearly tripped running back to the driver's seat. The engine still wouldn't start, but I locked every door, gripping the steering wheel as if that would keep me safe. That's when I saw movement in the side mirror. For a split second, the reflection showed a pale figure standing at the tree line. Too tall, too thin, its shoulders jutting like broken branches. And though the distance should have made it impossible, I swear I could see its eyes. They were the same ones I'd glimpsed in the basement, unblinking, hungry, and watching only me. The storm broke overhead, rain slamming against the windshield so hard it blurred everything beyond a few feet. By the time I wiped my eyes and checked the mirror again, the figure was gone. But the footprints were closer to the car. I don't remember deciding to move. I just did, fumbling with my phone, praying for a signal, dialing the only number I could think of, roadside assistance. The call went through, though the connection crackled with static. A woman's voice answered. "Assistance, what's your location?" I gave it, fast and shaky, staring at the trees. "We'll have someone there soon," she said. And then, softer, almost a whisper, "Don't get out of the car." The line went dead. The next hour was the longest of my life. Rain beat down in sheets. The car shook with every gust of wind, and I sat frozen, eyes darting from mirror to mirror, waiting for that face to appear again. When headlights finally cut through the storm, I nearly sobbed with relief. A tow truck pulled in behind me, orange hazard lights blinking. A man climbed out, raincoat pulled tight, and came to my window. "You called?" he shouted over the storm. I unlocked the door just enough to crack it open. He leaned down, water dripping off the brim of his hood. His face was pale, his eyes too wide, too familiar. I knew them instantly. It was him, the thing from the basement, smiling at me in the rain. I always thought of life as something steady, something that moved in quiet circles. Teaching at the elementary school, walking the same cracked sidewalks of our Montana town, waving at familiar faces in the grocery store. It all made me believe that nothing truly terrible could ever reach me here. The town had its own rhythm, and I fell into it like a leaf caught in a slow-moving stream. Every day, after school let out, I'd take the same path home, down Main Street, past the diner with its faded red booths, across the small bridge where kids liked to toss rocks into the water, and finally toward the grove at the edge of town. There, standing crooked and wide, was the old wishing tree, its branches bent in a way that looked almost human, arms stretching outward, as if waiting to gather secrets. People had tied ribbons, shoelaces, even scraps of paper with hope scrawled in pencil onto its limbs. I never left a wish, but I stopped there almost every evening. Something about it felt like an anchor, steady, rooted, reliable. I'd breathe in the scent of pine and soil, listen to the hum of cicadas, and let the noise of the day slip away. That was before the night that broke everything. It was late summer, the sky still holding onto streaks of orange long after the sun had gone down. I'd just finished dinner with my friend Kelly at the diner, and we'd lingered too long over coffee, laughing about nothing important. When I stepped outside, The air was warm but restless, the kind of air that made the hairs on your arms rise without knowing why. The streets were mostly empty, just the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. I decided to take the long way home, past the wishing tree, even though night was settling quicker than I expected. There was comfort in routine, and that path always felt like mine. Halfway down the gravel stretch leading toward the grove, I heard it, the low, uneven growl of an engine. Headlights flared behind me, too bright, too close. At first I thought it was just some kid speeding down the back road, but the sound didn't pass. It bore down, louder, heavier. I turned just as the truck swerved. There was no time to run, no time to even scream. The world became a rush of blinding light, the screech of tires, and then the crack of my body meeting metal. Pain came sharp and merciless, then disappeared into a drowning silence. I don't remember hitting the ground. I only remember the tree, the way its shadow stretched over me, its ribbons trembling in the night breeze. For a second, it looked like the tree was leaning closer, its branches curling downward, as though reaching for me. And then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, it wasn't the wishing tree that greeted me. It was a hospital ceiling, pale and cracked with water stains that looked like faces if I stared long enough. My body was stitched together with steel and scars, rods in my leg, a brace around my ribs, skin stapled like torn fabric. The doctors told me I should be grateful to be alive. Grateful. But survival didn't feel like living. The man behind the wheel had been drunk, a repeat offender, someone who should never have been allowed behind the wheel again. Worse, I knew him. Everyone in town did. He was the father of one of my former students, a man whose name was whispered in gossip for years, but never punished enough to matter. He walked away from that night without a scratch, while I lost almost everything that made me who I was. Teaching was gone. My independence was gone. Every step was a limp. Every breath a reminder that bones don't heal the way people hope they will. When I finally left the hospital, I found myself drawn back to the wishing tree. I thought standing there again would ground me, that maybe I could feel the way I once did, safe, steady, part of something unshakable. But the tree wasn't the same anymore, or maybe it was me who had changed. The ribbons didn't look hopeful now. They looked like warnings. Faded cloth swayed like restless fingers. In the silence, I swore I could hear whispers threading through the branches. Words I couldn't make out but felt in the marrow of my broken bones. I turned away quickly, telling myself it was just exhaustion, just the trauma talking. Yet as I walked home, the sound followed me, the low rustle, the breath of something that wasn't wind. That night, sleep came in broken fragments. I dreamed of headlights bursting through the dark, of ribbons tightening like nooses around the tree, of voices repeating my name. When I woke, my body ached with more than physical pain. The room felt crowded, though no one was there. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep life as ordinary as I could, but ordinary had slipped away, and something else had taken its place. Every time I passed the wishing tree, I felt it watching me. I woke with a start, unsure if the sound that pulled me from sleep had come from inside my dream or outside the thin walls of the cabin. My phone, left on the nightstand, glowed faintly. 2:41 a.m. The silence that followed pressed against me, heavy and expectant, as if the whole world had paused to listen. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, not the pounding of a fist, but a soft, deliberate rap. 3 taps against the front door. I froze, staring at the darkness, waiting to convince myself I'd imagined it. My breath caught in my throat. Another set of knocks followed, steady and patient, not the frantic kind of someone in danger. Whoever, or whatever it was, they weren't in a rush. I slid out of bed, the old floorboards creaking beneath my weight like they were betraying me. The cabin seemed even smaller now, every shadow swelling to fill the room. I told myself it was probably a lost hiker, someone who'd gotten turned around in the woods. But even as I thought it, Unease gnawed at the edges of the idea. No one hikes out here at this hour. No one stumbles on a stranger's cabin in the middle of the night, unless they were already looking for it. The knocks came again, louder this time, accompanied by the faint scrape of something across the wood. I swallowed hard and forced my legs to carry me forward. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling in a way that made me hate myself. Silence. I hesitated, then reached for the lantern on the counter and flicked it on. The weak amber glow spilled across the room but didn't push back much of the darkness outside. Slowly, carefully, I unlatched the door and cracked it open just an inch. The night was thick with mist, the kind that blurs trees into gray silhouettes. The porch creaked under the weight of my shifting stance, but beyond that, nothing. No figure, no footprints in the damp dirt, just empty space. I closed the door quickly, heart hammering against my ribs. That's when I saw it. Scratched into the wood near the frame of the door were 3 small symbols, crude but deliberate. They hadn't been there when I arrived. My stomach dropped. I backed away, nearly tripping over the rug, and sat on the edge of the bed, forcing myself to think. The cabin had seemed like a safe refuge, a place to escape, but now it felt like a trap. The forest outside wasn't just wilderness. It was watching me. Minutes crawled by. I thought about leaving, about sprinting to my car, but the keys were in my bag, and to reach it, I'd have to walk past the door again. So I sat frozen, clutching the lantern, until I noticed movement at the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog. A shadow passed across the glass, slow and deliberate, like someone was circling the cabin. I held my breath, my pulse racing so fast I thought it might give me away. The shape stopped just outside the window. Even through the fogged glass, I could see the faint outline of a face. I dropped the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. The cabin swallowed me whole, and I pressed myself flat against the wall, praying whoever, or whatever it was hadn't seen me. For what felt like hours, I stayed there, every muscle stiff, until I gathered the courage to peek again. The window was empty. I tried to calm myself, whispering under my breath that I was just tired, imagining things. But when I turned, something caught my eye. The same symbol from the doorframe, scratched faintly into the inside wall, right above the bed where I'd been sleeping. The realization hit me like ice. They'd already been inside. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was staring at the symbol. The next I was grabbing my keys from the bag, my shoes from under the bed, and bolting for the door. The cold night air slapped me as I stumbled onto the porch, but I didn't care. I sprinted toward the car, heart slamming against my chest. The woods erupted around me, branches snapping, leaves rustling, the sound of someone keeping pace just out of sight. I didn't dare look back. My hands fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them before I got the door open and collapsed into the driver's seat. I locked the doors, shoved the key into the ignition, and turned. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Relief surged through me as I slammed the gear into reverse and sped down the dirt path, gravel spitting out behind me. Only when the cabin had vanished into the mist did I risk a glance in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the road, just at the line where the trees swallowed the light of my taillights. Tall, still, watching, but the fog thickened, and it was gone. I drove through the night, not daring to stop. The symbols still burned into my mind, and even now, safe in my apartment, surrounded by concrete and streetlights, I can't shake the feeling that I didn't really leave the forest behind. Every night I hear it, 3 soft knocks on my door, always at 2:41 a.m. I never thought I'd wake up to the news that my sister was dead. Lila had always been careful, cautious, meticulous, the kind of person who double-checked locks, avoided dark alleys, and hated swimming in anything deeper than knee-high. But when I got the call, my heart dropped before my brain could catch up. Drowned, near the old quarry at the edge of town. Accident, they said. Wrong place, wrong time. But I knew better. I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks. I should have. We'd always talked almost every night. She'd text me when she got home from work, send me pictures of the cats, ask about my life, vent about her coworkers. But nothing. 2 weeks of silence. And now this. The town was quiet that day, but not in a comforting way. Millfield had always been small, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you even knew it yourself. But today, even the usual chatter at the diner felt subdued, like the air had been pressed down. People kept their distance, their eyes darting away when they caught mine. I felt like a stranger in the streets I'd grown up in. I went to her apartment first. It was untouched since the police had cleared it, except for the obvious signs of the investigation. Chalk outlines, evidence markers, tape across the door. I stepped inside, trying not to touch anything, and made my way to her desk. That's when I found the journal. It wasn't the kind of diary you write fluffy thoughts in. It was methodical, obsessive almost. Pages filled with sketches of strange symbols, geometric shapes, spirals, and cryptic annotations in her neat handwriting. Names were crossed out, dates circled, cryptic notes like, "They know I'm close," and "Voices at night, always near the water." The thing that made my blood run cold was the bottom of one page, a map of our town, with tiny X's marked near every body of water, the quarry circled repeatedly. She had been investigating something beneath the town, beneath the places we thought were safe. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept the journal on my lap, reading and rereading it, trying to piece together what she had been doing. The deeper I read, the heavier the air in my apartment felt. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind through the old windows made me jump. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay. I had to see the quarry. I had to see what Lila had found. The drive out there was short, but it felt endless. The trees along the road seemed to lean in, branches scratching the sides of my truck like skeletal fingers. When I arrived, the quarry looked innocuous enough in daylight. Quiet water reflecting the morning sun, birds perched on the edges. But the journal had taught me to look closer. I walked the perimeter, trying to follow the X's she had marked. There were old paths worn into the dirt, leading into thick underbrush. The ground was soft, damp from recent rain. I noticed small disturbances in the soil, like someone had been digging or had been dragged through here. I shivered, but pressed on. I found a rope tied to a tree, frayed, old, but not decades old. It had been used recently. My heart raced. My mind screamed at me to turn back, but I felt like if I did, I'd be letting Lila's work, and perhaps the truth, die with her. I spent hours exploring the quarry edges, following hidden trails, finding strange markings carved into trees, spirals, triangles, runes I didn't recognize. The deeper I went, the more I felt eyes on me. Not the normal wildlife eyes, but something patient, waiting, watching. By late afternoon, I stumbled upon a small cavern at the base of a cliff. The entrance was partially hidden by vines, moss, and the shadows cast by the setting sun. It was the only place in the quarry that matched the description in Lila's journal. I hesitated. The journal clutched in my hand, then stepped inside. The air was damp, thick, carrying the faint chemical smell of something decaying. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing jagged rocks, shallow puddles, and on the walls, more of the symbols from the journal carved deep and fresh. Whoever had done this had been here recently. And then I heard it, a whisper, not far away, echoing softly off the stone walls. My name, Alex. I froze, heart hammering. I knew it wasn't her. Lila had been dead. My instincts screamed to leave, but I had to know. The whispering grew, layered now, coming from multiple directions. Words I didn't understand. Phrases that felt like they were pressing into my mind, trying to make me see, make me understand. I backed up, stumbling over a rock, and that's when I saw the water, a pool at the back of the cavern, black as ink. Ripples spread across it even though the air was still, and on the surface, faint reflections, faces, mine and Lila's, distorted, screaming silently. I knew then that Lila hadn't just stumbled here. She had been trying to stop something, trying to expose something older, deeper, and far worse than anyone in town could imagine. And now, it was aware of me. I barely remember crawling out of the cavern, my flashlight swinging wildly. The whispering didn't stop. It followed me up the cliffside, around the edges of the quarry, until I reached my truck, lungs burning and heart hammering like a jackhammer. Back at my apartment, I tried to rationalize it. Shadows, echo, adrenaline. But the journal didn't lie, and Lila had been careful. She hadn't been imagining things. She had been hunted. Over the next week, I retraced her steps. She had visited old libraries, questioned locals, and checked municipal records. Each clue pointed to the same conclusion. Beneath the town, in places like the quarry, old mines and forgotten wells, something was feeding, waiting, growing, and it needed the living to continue. One night, I stayed up watching the quarry from a distance. Mist rolled across the water, thick and unnatural. Shapes moved beneath the surface, shapes that didn't belong to fish or frogs. And then, the whispering again. Louder, insistent. I could hear my name, feel it pressing on my skull like fingertips. I knew I couldn't fight it alone. I contacted an old friend from college, someone who had studied folklore and myths. When I explained what I'd seen, he didn't laugh. He told me that the patterns and symbols matched descriptions of something called the awakened below, an entity that consumed the life and attention of those who meddled too close to its domain. It existed in the shadows of human curiosity, feeding on obsession and fear. That night, I returned to the quarry. I had to finish what Lila started. I had to see it, document it, survive it. The cavern was colder now, and the air hummed with an unnatural vibration. I could see the symbols glowing faintly on the walls, carved deep into the stone, pulsing with energy. The water at the back rippled again, and this time I saw it clearly. A mass of shifting darkness, ever moving, ever hungry. Faces swirled on the surface, mouths open, screaming, and I realized it had been feeding on the curiosity and fear of anyone who came too close. And then it reached for me. I don't know how I escaped. Something like tendrils, wet and black, lashed out, scraping my clothes, tangling in my hair. I ran blindly, tripping over rocks, feeling the air press against my chest as if the cavern itself was trying to keep me in. I burst into the night, gasping, shaking, the journal clutched to my chest. The whispering didn't stop entirely. Even in my apartment, I could hear it faintly at the edge of sleep. But I had proof. I had Lila's journal, my own photographs, notes. I left town the next morning, moving far away. I couldn't face anyone there again. Millfield was a town of memories, secrets, and something beneath it all that should have stayed buried. Sometimes I wake up at night, imagining the water in the quarry stirring, shadows moving just beneath the surface. I know it's waiting, watching, hoping someone else will come too close. And I know one thing for certain. Curiosity doesn't just kill, it feeds. The fuel light had been glaring at me for the last 10 miles, a constant orange reminder that I had pushed my luck too far. I hated this stretch of road, the way the highway narrowed into 2 faded lanes bordered by endless cornfields that seemed to whisper in the dark. There wasn't much between the town and the county line, except the old gas station that never closed. The place appeared out of the night like a beacon, fluorescent lights buzzing above cracked pavement, a handful of pumps leaning like crooked teeth. The sign above the store flickered weakly. Gas, snacks, coffee. It should have felt like a relief, but instead my stomach tightened. Something about the empty lot and the way the shadows stretched too long across the pavement didn't sit right. I pulled up to pump number 3, cut the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The air had that late October bite, sharp enough to sting my nose, and the silence pressed down heavier than it should have. A dog barked somewhere far off. The sound carried on the wind like a warning. As I unscrewed the gas cap, movement caught my eye. The front door to the station stood half open, swinging slightly with each gust. Through the glass, I saw the clerk, a kid I'd seen before, probably no older than 19, backed against the wall. In front of him stood two men in dark hoodies, their faces hidden, their posture tense. Even from out here, I could feel the electricity in the air. One of them grabbed the clerk by his shirt, yanking him forward so hard his headset flew off. The other was already behind the counter, pulling open drawers, sweeping handfuls of bills into a plastic bag. My chest tightened. It didn't take a genius to figure out what I was looking at. A robbery in progress. For a split second, I thought about slipping back into my truck, flooring it back toward town, and calling the cops from somewhere safer. That would have been the smart move. But then I saw the glint of metal as one of the men pulled something from his waistband. Even from this distance, I knew what it was. A gun. The clerk's eyes were wide, wet with panic. He was just a kid trying to get through his shift, and here he was staring down the barrel of something that could end him in an instant. My body moved before my brain had finished making the decision. I left the pump running, pulled out my phone, and started toward the store. My boots crunched over loose gravel, each step louder than I wanted. My fingers were clumsy as I tried to dial, the cold mixing with adrenaline, making me hit the wrong numbers twice before finally connecting. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered the address, forcing the words through a throat gone dry. Robbery in progress. Gas station off Route 9. Send help. Then I shoved the phone into my jacket pocket without hanging up, praying they could still hear. The bell above the door gave a cheerful ding as I stepped inside. The sound felt wrong, absurd, like laughter at a funeral. Both men spun toward me. The one with the gun kept it pressed to the clerk's head, but shifted his body to face me. His eyes were pale, bloodshot, pupils blown wide, the kind of eyes you see in someone who's been up for days on something toxic. His jaw worked like he was chewing invisible gum. The other man, broader with a scruffy beard, clutched his bag of bills like it was treasure, his breathing ragged. I lifted my hand slightly. Just getting coffee, I said, my voice too steady to be real. Inside, I was ice. The tall one studied me, his lips twitching in a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I know you. The words hit harder than the cold air outside. Recognition. I hadn't expected that. You're the mechanic, he said, stepping closer. The gun never wavered. You fixed my cousin's car. Charged him for an alternator. His tone was low, accusing, full of venom I couldn't make sense of. My mouth went dry. I work at the shop in town, I admitted carefully. I fix a lot of cars. His face twisted. That alternator failed. He lost his job 'cause of you. Lost his apartment. You ruined him. The logic was insane, but it didn't matter. He believed it. And now, in his warped mind, the robbery wasn't about money anymore. It was about me. The clerk slid down the wall, curling in on himself, his hands over his head. The bearded man muttered something about cops, tugging at his partner's sleeve. But the tall one didn't care. His focus was locked on me. I forced my voice to stay calm. Listen, man, I don't know what happened with your cousin, but this isn't the way. You walk out now, no one gets hurt. You can still— Shut up! His voice cracked like a whip. He jabbed the gun toward me, so close now I could smell him. Sweat, cigarettes, and something chemical that burned my nostrils. You did this. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Relief surged through me for a heartbeat. Then dread followed. If he heard them too, and I knew he did, he was about to make a choice. The bearded one bolted for the door, clutching his bags. But the gunman didn't move. He looked at me with something like clarity, a horrible calm that froze my blood. You're the reason my cousin's life is gone, he said. Now I'm going to take yours. His finger tightened on the trigger. I dove sideways toward the chip aisle, knees screaming with pain as my body hit the floor. The gun went off with a deafening crack. White-hot fire tore through my lower back, spinning me into the shelves. Bags of chips rained down, crackling around me like useless confetti. A second shot exploded, this one higher, somewhere near my spine. And then, nothing. From the waist down, I felt nothing. I tried to crawl, but my legs refused to move. My cheek pressed against the cold linoleum, and all I could see were the clerk's sneakers, shuffling desperately toward the back exit, leaving red streaks from his cut hands. The gunman loomed over me for a moment, his shadow blotting out the buzzing light. His face wasn't rage anymore. It was something worse, confusion, like he hadn't expected it to be so easy. Then the sirens were on top of us, red and blue strobing across the windows. The gunman ran, boots splashing through spilled washer fluid, leaving me there on the floor. My blood spread fast, warm against the cold tile. My breaths came shallow, coppery. The phone was still in my pocket. Maybe the dispatcher was still listening. I wanted to beg them to hurry, but all that came out was a wet rattle from deep in my throat. The last thing I remember before the world tilted into black was the flickering fluorescent light above me, buzzing endlessly, like it was laughing at me for ever thinking this town was safe. When I woke up, I wasn't on the gas station floor anymore. The ceiling above me was white, too white, with lights that hummed as steady as the pump had buzzed outside the station. For a few long, disoriented moments, I thought maybe I hadn't survived at all, that this was what came next. Then the pain hit, sharp, overwhelming, blooming from my back and chest, like wildfire. I tried to sit up, but nothing happened. My legs were gone. Not gone exactly. I could still see them under the blanket, but they didn't belong to me anymore. I willed my toes to move. Nothing. My breath caught in my throat. Machines beeped around me. Somewhere to my left, a nurse's voice said something into a phone, too fast for me to catch. Moments later, Amy appeared at my bedside, her face pale, eyes swollen like she hadn't slept in days. "You're okay," she whispered, gripping my hand. "You're here." But I wasn't okay. Even before the doctor came in, even before the words incomplete spinal injury were explained to me in cold, clinical tones, I knew. My legs didn't work. My life had split cleanly in two, before that Thursday night and after. The first weeks blurred into one another. Surgeries, tubes, needles. Nurses lifting me like I weighed nothing, rolling me, cleaning me. I tried to focus on small victories, breathing without a machine, sitting up without vomiting, but the shadow of that gas station clung to me. I dreamed of it every night. Sometimes the gun went off again and again, louder and louder until it shook me awake. Sometimes I was frozen in place, unable to move, watching as the gunman turned his weapon toward Amy instead, or toward the young clerk, his head snapping back in slow motion. Every time I woke drenched in sweat, gasping, convinced I was still lying on that linoleum floor, tasting blood in my mouth. They caught the men 3 days later, holed up in a cheap motel not far from the interstate. I read about it in the paper, their mugshots staring back at me. Jerome Bassett, the tall one with the gun. Douglas Kirby, the bearded one who ran first. Their names meant nothing to me before that night. Now they lived in my head, rent-free, ghosts I couldn't exorcise. Jerome got life. Douglas got years that sounded long on paper but would end too soon. The town cheered when the sentences came down, but there was no celebration for me. No verdict could give me back what I lost on that floor. Our house became something else. The front steps had to be replaced with a ramp. Grab bars lined the bathroom like reminders that I was no longer trusted to stand on my own. A hospital bed crowded our bedroom, swallowing the space where our nightstand used to be. Amy tried to smile through it, tried to convince me we'd be okay, but every time I caught her looking at me when she thought I wasn't watching, I saw the grief in her face. She hadn't signed up for this, for a husband who couldn't walk, who needed help just to get out of bed. Neighbors rallied. They brought casseroles, raised money. shook my hand, and told me how brave I was. But their sympathy was just another weight pressing me down. I didn't want pity. I wanted my legs back. I wanted my shop back. I wanted that Thursday night to never have happened. But the worst part wasn't the pity. It was the silence. Late at night, when the house was still, I'd hear it. The buzz of fluorescent lights. The cheerful ding of the gas station bell. Sometimes, if I closed my eyes, I could feel the linoleum cold under my cheek again. And sometimes I swear I could hear him. Not in dreams, not in memory. Here, in the house. Jerome's rasping voice too close to my ear. You did this. You ruined him. I'd snap awake, heart racing, sweat freezing on my skin. Amy would stir beside me, asking if I was okay. I never had the courage to tell her the truth, that even in prison Jerome hadn't let me go. Months passed. The world outside kept turning, but mine had shrunk to the dimensions of a chair, a bed, a hallway. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. One night, after Amy had gone to bed, I rolled myself into the kitchen. The clock on the stove glowed 2:13 a.m. I sat there in the dark, staring out the window at the quiet street, and then I saw it. A truck, old, beat up, headlights uneven, parked crooked under the streetlight. My throat went dry. It looked exactly like the Silverado I remembered from that night, the one by the dumpster at the station. I blinked, and the street was empty. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, just my brain replaying old images. But when I wheeled myself back toward the bedroom, I caught a glimpse of something in the hallway mirror. Not me, Jerome, standing just behind me, his pale eyes glowing faint in the glass. I spun the chair around, heart hammering, but the hall was empty. Still, the mirror lingered in my mind long after I forced myself back into bed. I wish I could say it was a one-time thing, but it wasn't. The truck, the voice, the reflection, they came back again and again, like he hadn't just stolen my legs. He'd followed me home. Some nights I wonder if Jerome is still in that cell at all. Maybe he left something of himself behind at the gas station, something that latched onto me when his bullets tore through my back. Maybe prison can't hold a man who's already inside my head. Maybe it never will.